Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back. Or if you're joining us for the first time, we are here with the Shaw Media Illinois and Daily Herald Media Group 2020 NFL College Draft Show Part 2. We did number 1 yesterday, and we were pleasantly surprised that we had such a great response that we thought, hey, we got 3 days to the draft. We got another day till we start. Let's come back and see if we can dig a little bit deeper into this. We are once again brought to us by our friends at the Collins Construction Group. Thank you so much for making this possible for us and all of our viewers and readers and listeners. If you want to create the home of your dreams with remodels or renovations, you want to visit ccghome.com and you can get more information there. And of course, to Shaw Media Illinois as launching this whole thing, their great partnership with the Daily Herald Media Group. And that's how we come about our panel. I am the director of football content at Shaw Media. I think I said I'm Hub Arkush. If not, I'm guessing you might know that since you tuned in. And of course, we have our managing editor of Pro Football Weekly, Arthur Arkush, alongside outstanding sports writer for the Daily Herald, Joe Aguilar, joins us. And I kidded with Joe yesterday. We talk somewhat, not regularly, but often, but I only get to see him in the press box at Soldier Field. And we don't know when we're going to be there again, but we know we're going to have a lot of fun the next 3 days. So, Joe, good to have you alongside as well.
Thank you.
And we have the editor of the Shaw Media Illinois Sports Group, Kyle Nabors. And Kyle's going to be our moderator when we get to the question and answer part. A lot of you guys, we had a lot more questions after part 1 than we did going into part 1. So we're going to try and get through as many of them as we can before we do just kind of some general thoughts on a couple things we didn't focus that deeply on yesterday. Arthur, I'm going to start with you because obviously you are 24/7 pro football. The draft overall, there's been a lot of talk about this group. Many are calling it the best wide receiver group ever, one of the best offensive tackle groups, really deep at cornerback. And some are even saying one of the best drafts overall ever. I don't see that. I mean, it may be. We won't know for a couple of years. But it's a really good group, and it's really loaded in a few areas. What does that mean to everybody?
Well, I think it's good news for fans of every team, and I think it's probably even ideal news for, I don't know if ideal is the right word, it's a relative term here, but teams that aren't picking in the first round are in a better year to be doing that because it looks like the sort of clusters of talent could be pretty similar once you get down into the early 20s and then get all the way into the early and mid 40s. I'm not sure how much separation there's going to be between the actual caliber of prospects. So obviously for the Bears at 43 and 50, it's good news. I think there's about 5 teams who aren't picking in the first round. It's good news, but there are positions that are going to be shaky and you're going to see teams reach on. Quarterback is kind of an uneven class, I think, and then tight end, which I don't know how much we talked about it yesterday. But not a very good group. So teams that are really up against it at that position may feel a bit of desperation or maybe acting, they're not going to be working from a position of power, if you will.
You know, Joe, we of course have followers throughout the Nfc North, Detroit, Green Bay, Wisconsin, up in Minnesota. We go into Iowa and Indiana, but a lot of focus here on the Chicago Bears. And really, if there was going to be a year where you didn't have that first round pick, but you had multiple second round picks, and two of the strongest areas of the draft at wide receiver and cornerback are two areas that some people think the Bears have their most significant needs. It seems to set up pretty well for them right now.
I think it does, Hub. And, I kept thinking about what you said yesterday about, you could possibly see them trading both second-round picks. I wouldn't like that just as a Bears fan because I think you can get a day-one starter. If you move back in the third round, I think you just lessen your chances in theory. But I could see them trading one. But I'll tell you what, I think you could get your day one starters at corner and safety at 43 and 50. The problem is then you didn't do anything for your offense, which obviously needs a lot of help. And then you have no third and fourth round picks. So I just can't see them taking two defensive guys, whether they be a corner and a safety. I think taking a receiver probably makes more sense. But that said, considering how deep the wide receiver group is, maybe you can get a guy in the fifth round that would have been a third round pick in any other year. So lots potential scenarios, and for teams that have a lot of picks, even better scenario. The Bears aren't one of those teams with only 6, but there's some possibilities certainly there at 43 and 50, whether they move both picks, keep one, trade one of them.
You know, Kyle, with Shaw Media Illinois and our group, we cover blanket pretty much the whole northern half of the state and reach into the border states somewhat. But we like to focus a lot on some of our local prospects. And certainly one of the big stories of today, tonight, Thursday, and quite possibly into tomorrow, we'll have to wait and see, is going to be what many people, or who many people, I should say, have ranked as the number 1 tight end in the draft. And we talked about Cole a little bit yesterday, but Cole Kmet actually, right near our offices for both the Daily Herald and the Northwest Herald, one of our biggest shop papers. And he's a young man that we focused a lot on. And his dad, Frank, is a former Chicago Bear. And I know a lot of Bears fans, beyond the obvious need at tight end, have a rooting interest in the Bears' first pick in this draft. And that's not something you always see.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think there definitely is that rooting interest. I talked about it a little bit yesterday, though. The Bears need impact players right away. You particularly look at secondary wide receiver and offensive line. And tight end, typically, even in the first round, those guys take a couple of years to develop. You don't see a lot of guys coming in the first year and make an impact. And it's kind of an odd thing with Cole Kmet, because I've seen him mock anywhere in the late 20s to late second round to even early third round. So I feel like there's around the league, there's kind of a big discrepancy about the impact and the immediate impact that Cole Kmet can have.
Yeah, I mean, we've been working on this, guys, for literally 3 or 4 months now, but you try and take it up to the 11th hour. And so I won't say I pulled an all-nighter, but the last 48 have been interesting, trying to finalize our top 100 rankings. And we finally posted them last night. Now, all this is ranking best player available based on all the scouting information that we have. It doesn't mean that our 7th best player is going to be the 7th pick, or in the case of a Cole Kmet, the bottom line is that the top 2 tight ends, Cole Kmet and Harrison Bryant out of Florida Atlantic, are pretty close to each other, and they both hit somewhere between 45 and 55. I don't have the list in front of me. So if, in fact, Cole, sneaks into the first round, it's going to be at the back end. I've seen a lot of mocks that have him going to the Bengals with the first pick in the second round. But there also is the chance that he could be there at 43 or even 50. And that's not a wrap on the kid. I mean, Cole Kmet may be an outstanding NFL player, but once you get past those first 5 or 10, the scouting reports tend to range wide and far on these guys. So it's going to be a very interesting, at least day 1 and maybe day 2 for the Kmet family. We'll keep an eye on all of that. But right now, before I waste too much more time, we do want to get to your questions, because I understand we have a good boatload. So I'm going to hand it off to Kyle and let him be our moderator now.
Yeah, first one comes from Ron, and he asked, given the current conditions, do you think that the pandemic affected teams' abilities to scout as deeply as they normally would? And what kind of effect could that have over the next few days?
Well, guys, I think where everybody is starting with this, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, and I think it's time to kind of put a period on it. What the NFL is doing is good for NFL fans. Now, whether it is eventually good for the game and how it impacts the quality of this draft, we're just going to have to wait and see. But it leads to kind of my part 1 of the answer. I don't really know, but I do know all 32 teams are working in the exact same situations. And just like in a normal draft, some teams are going to do it better than others. There is no question in my mind, Joe, that the big difference here is that a number of pro days were canceled. And a number of these players always choose not to run at the combine or not to do certain drills because they want to be in their own controlled environment. They can do a little better. Well, now they never got to do those. And so some of the teams don't have that information. Almost all of the in-person visits the teams bring players into were canceled, because those are usually starting about mid-March. And a lot of, basically teams are doing what we're doing. They're Zooming together. They're doing video interviews. And you can look at a guy. I can look at you guys in the eye right now. I'm trying not to, because I want to look in the camera and not look like I'm wandering around. But I can look at you and I can see your face. I can see what you're going to say and try and read it. But it's not the same as being in person. So, Joe, I'll come to you first. There's no doubt in my mind that everybody has a little bit less information than they would like. But again, Joe, it's equal. So I don't know if it's going to hurt or not.
Yeah, I think there are 2 schools of thought here. One is, look, I'm a guy who loves doing, when I interview athletes, coaches, whatever, in person. I mean, there's nothing like sometimes you can't, logistics mean you can't do it in person. You have to do a lot of interviews by phone. We all do. But I prefer the in-person interview, whether that's a coach, an athlete, whoever I'm talking to, even family. And we've done a lot of those as a family with the Zoom the last 2-3 weeks. So you're losing that aspect of it. On the other end, I heard, I saw one story, one GM said, look, first of all, you go by film, number one, anyway. So you got to trust your eye and what you see on film. And then the other part of what he was saying, or someone else was saying, is that, in today's age with kids so social media savvy and tech savvy, they're used to doing this kind of stuff anyway. So for them, it's easy to be themselves anyway. But I don't know. I think, and there are a lot of old scouts. I mean, there are a lot of guys who are graybeards when it comes to this. They like the face-to-face. So that negates it. But the ultimate equalizer is everybody's in the same position.
Arthur, I've always had a problem. Well, you know this because you've heard me bitch about it enough, with a lot of analysts whose draft boards, change dramatically after the combine or after pro days because they see these kids working out. And as John Fox famously used to say, watching kids play in their underwear is not the same as playing football. I mean, to me, as Joe just said, it is about the game tape. But I think and it's interesting, again, because we don't know which guys will benefit from it and which guys will be penalized for it. But I do think that the kids who chose not to run at the combine or do certain other workouts, some will benefit because it turns out we thought they were speed merchants and they're 4.5 guys, but other guys who can get under 4.4 and you didn't know that's going to hurt them a little bit in terms of where they fall. But I think that's more about the individual player's draft slot. I'm not sure it's about the team's, overall grade on them.
Yeah, Hub, I think the biggest effect of COVID-19 as it relates to this draft is going to be on the non-combine participants. There were about 330 prospects at the event in Indianapolis this year. Obviously, there's only 255 draft picks to begin with, but there's always a few dozen guys who don't get the combine invites and still end up getting drafted. I don't expect it to be the case this year. I'll give you a good example. The Bears last year spent a 7th-round pick on Steven Denmark out of Valdosta State. He didn't get invited to the combine. Neither did Duke Shelley, their 6th-rounder. Actually, either of their 6th-rounders, Kareth White, either. So half of their draft class last year didn't get invited to the combine. This is a team that loves those small school players and loves what they see on tape, but you still want to be able to verify some of the testing. So last year, the Bears were able to bring down Deshae Townsend in one of their scouts to Valdosta State to work out Steven Denmark privately. That's the type of thing where they're probably going to end up going in a different direction. And then I think just unique circumstances with injuries. Obviously, the whole Tua thing is going to be the number one area of intrigue tonight. How far does he fall, if at all, or do the Dolphins slide into number 3 or stay at number 5 and pull the trigger on Tua? But I think it's the lack of verified testing information on the non-combine participants and then some of the higher profile injury risk guys who could kind of feel this effect the most come this evening and this weekend.
All righty, Kyle, what else you got for us?
All right, well, we're going to get into some NFC North talk here in terms of what the other teams are going to do tonight in the first round. But before we do that, because we're talking about the possibility of teams trading up or trading down, we had a question from Kimball that said, I'm with the Atlanta Falcons moving into the top 5. I believe they're at number 16. If they did, what would they be looking for?
It's interesting. There were a lot of reports about the Falcons talking to teams trying to get up. But my understanding is that their main goal was they were targeting Washington. They wanted to get to Chase Young, and that's where he's going to go at number 2. Guys, in my wildest dreams, Ron Rivera is one of my better friends in the business. I don't know if people remember this. The younger listeners don't, but after Chico retired with the Bears, he was my broadcast partner doing pre and post on the Bears games for 3 years before he decided to get into coaching. And so I know a little bit about the way his mind works. And when he's got a chance to get what many scouts are calling a generational type defensive player, and particularly at that position, the pass rusher, I just don't think he's moving. And the reports I was hearing late last night as I was continuing to get phone calls is that's over. And once Atlanta realized it wasn't happening, they made a few more calls and they've talked about some other spots. But, they think they're in pretty good shape on offense. They're always looking to upgrade that offensive line. Julio Jones is getting up there. We know this is a great group of receivers, but they can address that at 16. So at this point, Arthur, unless you're hearing something different, I'm not saying Atlanta won't trade up, but I think the urgency that we were hearing was maybe to get a crack at Chase Young, and that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I definitely think the same thing. And look, there's precedent, obviously, with the Falcons traded all the way up to number 6, I believe, from the late 20s for Julio Jones almost a decade ago. So we know that they would like to be that type of aggressive, Thomas Dimitroff and company. Well, you have to remember about that draft. I believe A.J. Green was also a top 10 pick. This edge class is nothing like that. It's Chase Young and then a massive drop-off. So look at what Ron Rivera had in Carolina. Outside of Julius Peppers, not a lot of established dudes on the edges. Hard to imagine any team is coming up with a package rich enough to push Washington out of that second spot for the number one player in the draft in Chase Young.
Yeah, Arthur, I'm probably wrong about this, but I know, the Twitter is already people looking to find our mistakes. It may have been 4 that they traded up to get Julio Jones. Not really relevant. The point is, it's hard to do that. And Joe, fans love the idea. Let's trade up and get this guy. I don't think they realize what goes into making these trades, and that usually there is the trade value draft chart. We all have a copy of it, and you can stay fairly close to that and make it work. But the teams that do best with it usually try and get bargains when they do that. When you're trading down, you can do well. When you're trading up, you generally overpay a little bit for whatever you're going for.
Yeah, I think Bears can relate with the Mitchell Trubisky situation there a couple of years ago, what you had to pay. So, if the Falcons stick at 16, you guys know them better than me, their needs, but, you're going to get a good football player, a real good football player. So whether that's offense, their needs might be more on defense, but maybe they take a wide receiver because of the aging Julio Jones, but they're going to get a good football player. And again, Chase Young, why would you try to, trade out of that spot? Unless it was a king's ransom, which, has been done before by teams.
The one other name, guys, that would be a tailor-made fit for the Falcons, of course, is Isiah Simmons with his speed, his versatility, the way Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff gravitate toward those guys. And then remember, they cut Desmond Trufant, too, so they did create a cornerback hole. But, again, this is probably all likely to be a moot point. They'll either be drafting somewhere in the teens or at least not getting all the way up to number 2.
It is a great point, though, Arthur, because when we make these, like the Bears releasing Prince Amukamara, when they let Trufant go, it wasn't because they were certain they could replace him in the draft. They had a plan, but it is an area they'd like to address. I actually have Isiah Simmons rated as the number 2 prospect in this draft, behind Chase Young at number 1. And Kyle, I think Arthur makes an excellent point. I know that Young was the initial target. The problem with Simmons is you're not sure, is he a safety, is he a linebacker, can he make the impact that Young can make coming off the edge? But it's a good point, Arthur. It is something worth keeping an eye on.
What do you think, Hub, from your evaluation? I know he's a bit of a lightning rod in this draft. Is he someone that you think can live in the box playing a linebacker role, or is he going to have to be a little bit farther from the line of scrimmage and not to get exposed?
Most of the scouts I've talked to say he can do anything he wants. As a matter of fact, he's such a freak of an athlete that they're not sure that they couldn't put 15, 20 pounds on him and have him be an edge rusher. But that's not what they're looking at right now, or I shouldn't say the guys I've talked to, usually if you're going to draft somebody and make that big a change, and again, Bears fans know this through history, that rarely works out. Right now, I would say it's 50-50. A lot of teams love him in that hybrid strong safety, step-up linebacker role where he'll be listed as the safety, but he'll be playing like a Deion Buchanan did for a while. Mark Barron is one of those guys. And if you give him a chance to make plays all over the field like that, he can probably have the biggest impact.
In fairness, Hub, their safety linebacker conversion worked out pretty darn well, right? I think it was the Shane McClellan project and some of the other ones, but Brian Urlacher ended up just fine.
Good point. Point taken.
All right, well, let's go ahead and let's move into the NFC North, and we're going to start with Detroit, and this kind of is a good segue out of that, because if Washington isn't trading down out of 2, there is a possibility Detroit could trade down. And Jeff Okudah, as we talk about, Atlanta needs a cornerback badly. That is a position of need for them. So maybe that's an area Atlanta can slide up into the 3rd pick. But let's say Detroit stays there at number 3. Let's start with Detroit, and then we'll move to Minnesota and Green Bay. Let's go through those first-round picks, starting with Detroit.
Well, and guys, this is where it does get interesting, because even though I just said generally when a team releases a Prince Amukamara or a Desmond Trufant, it's not looking to replace him in the draft. But Detroit knew they were at number 3 when they did that. They knew that every cornerback was going to be on the board. They already knew that Okudah was going to be, in the top 4, top 6, no matter what board you look at. So they might be locked in. But on the other hand, I would argue the Detroit Lions need help everywhere on defense. There's not a position on defense where they wouldn't draft. And so that does bring Isiah Simmons into play. That brings Brown, the big defensive tackle, into play. There are a lot of different things they could do, but that 3rd pick is really valuable. And Detroit, I think even Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia have to acknowledge, Joe, that they're not in the same category as the Vikings, Packers, or Bears. And I don't know where, once we get to the season and we're done with the offseason, we got to remember the Bears are 1 year away from dominating the division. So I think it is fair. Well, just look at how they played last year. They beat the Vikings twice. I mean, the Packers they should have had. And so those three teams, not just the Packers and the Vikings, are clearly a notch ahead of the Lions. And so if I'm Bob Quinn, I'm fielding all offers for that pick because you can get a lot. For that number 3, you should be able to get 2 1s, maybe a 2, at least 2 1s and a 3 and a 4. And that's something that has to be appealing to them. My best guess is that Detroit finds a trade partner.
I was going to say the exact same thing, Hub. I think they're in a great position at 3 because I think they can even trade back a couple of slots and possibly still get Okudah if that's the guy you want. But you're going to get a football player, again, a really good football player in the top 6, 7 picks anyway. So maybe there's a trade partner. Is there someone who really wants Tua that badly and is afraid someone would move up? Again, almost like reminiscent of the Bears situation with Trubisky, where you're afraid someone else is going to move in. So then you offer maybe more than you need to. But I think if they stay at 3, it's got to be Okudah. But you can't go wrong there with Simmons either. But I think trading down for them, not too far down, where they can still get Okudah possibly or another impact guy on D, is the way to go. Because, I mean, other than a quarterback, I mean, you're good with Matthew Stafford for a while still, right? So, but otherwise, yeah, across the board, they need help.
Well, and Arthur, the other thing about the Lions is as great as their need at cornerback is, they have a huge need for pass rushers. And really this draft, one area where it's not strong, once you get past Chase Young, there's some very good football players, but you look at the next 2 or 3 edge rushers on the board, and whether you've got Gross Matos from Penn State or AJ Epinesa from Iowa, those guys are probably going to be there in the 15, 16 to 30 range. And so, the further down the Lions go, the more they can get. If you go from 3 to 12, 13, well, then you're going to get at least one more 1 and probably a 2. And so if they're trying, and there's going to be good pass rushers in every draft, we know that, but as far as how these prospects are going to fall, they could trade down and really load up and still really address the pass rush and still find a starting corner.
Yeah, and frankly, that's probably a worst case scenario for the Bears and Bears fans is the Lions being able to load up on draft capital. Remember, they already got an extra pick to deal Darius Slay, I believe a 2nd rounder from Philly. So already working in somewhat of a position of power, and that could continue. You could argue the draft starts tonight at number 3 with the Lions. You could also argue it starts at number 5 with the Dolphins because they're loaded up with first rounders. But I think those 3 guys that we have mentioned, Okudah, Simmons, and Derek Brown are the 3 likely targets for the Detroit Lions. And then we're to assume, I believe, the Giants are going to go tackle, but I guess you can't rule out an Isiah Simmons at number 4 either.
Yeah, and Kyle, I think maybe the biggest question about the Detroit Lions is if they get all those picks, do they know what to do with them? Because it hasn't gone that well the last couple of years. There's this narrative in Chicago that Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy are in a make it or break it year. That's ridiculous. They would have to completely flop for Pace and Nagy to be in any jeopardy for their jobs this year. And I just don't see that happening. On the other hand, in Detroit, even though it's also year 3 for that duo, it is a make it or break it year for both Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia. So I can see where it would be wise to load up draft picks, but will they take the right players? That's why their jobs are in jeopardy right now.
Well, I think if they trade down, it's almost to the point where if they trade into the middle of the first round, let's say it was 16 with Atlanta, right? It's almost going to be difficult for them to make a mistake there because they need defense. It's clear they have defensive needs on every level. And there's going to be so many quarterbacks, wide receivers, and offensive tackles taken that someone like C.J. Henderson, even at 16, could still be there for him. And you get a tremendous cornerback at 16.
Well, let me throw in one other possibility here, guys. And this would really throw things up for grabs because nobody's expecting it. Matt Stafford has been one of the best and most durable quarterbacks in the NFL for almost a decade now. The injury that he missed the second half of the season last year was a broken back. I mean, it sounds dramatic, but at the end of the day, that's what it was. And it was an injury that actually occurred at the end of the 18 season. They thought it had healed by just, letting it rest and working on it throughout the offseason. And here he got to midseason last year and couldn't go anymore. Tua is going to be there at 3. Would they do it? I've heard this from a number of folks. Nobody thinks they're going to, but everybody's aware of the possibility. The hope is that Matt Stafford is 100%, because if he is, he's a franchise quarterback for another 4, 5, 6 years at least. But we don't know what they may know about the medicals. And so I don't think it's going to happen, but don't completely rule it out.
And just remember, Hub, if they were to make that bold move for Tua, they're likely drafting him to help their successors, as you just mentioned. If it's a make or break year for Quinn and for Patricia, drafting Tua does them no good at number 3.
Well, Arthur, now I'm going to remind you of something, though. People were saying the same thing about Ryan Pace when he drafted Mitch Trubisky, and it turned out that, really wasn't the case because they immediately got better.
That Stafford was an candidate when his back got hurt last year. He was having a career year, right?
Right, but what I'm getting at is that things turned so dramatically the year after they drafted Trubisky, and there is some talent on that Detroit team. So even if Tua wasn't the reason for it, if they get their quarterback of the future and he does end up having to play and plays well, they're going to get another year out of it. It's a long shot, guys. We're debating something that's unlikely to happen. But, that's what's fun about the draft. We do that all the time.
I would say, add only this, guys, it would be so Lions-like if they drafted Tua and then he had like a 1 or 2 year NFL career because of the hip. I mean, that would be right. I mean, that would be like a Cleveland kind of bad thing. You can't win for losing kind of thing.
The only thing more Lions-like, Joe, would be if he balled out and then retired in his prime. That's what they really end up doing there in Detroit more often than anything. But yeah, it's always fun to take shots at the Lions. I mean, come on.
I love the Lions.
Guys, one more shout out for the Collins Construction Group before we get it to Kyle for the next question. We really appreciate them being our title sponsor and making this happen for us. Go to ccghome.com. More information about their great remodels, additions, whatever you want to do. Our thanks to the folks at Collins.
All right. Well, we talked Detroit there, but let's get into Minnesota and Green Bay, because these are picks here that really could impact the division this coming year. The Bears trying to catch up with those teams. And now Minnesota armed with 2 first-round picks after dealing Stephon Diggs at 22 and 25, I believe. Yeah, 22 and 25. They could get some impact players there that could keep them at the top of the division or fighting at the top of the division.
Guys, I'm not sure why the Vikings have struggled as much as they have these last couple of a struggle. They've been in the playoffs, but not been able to get over the hump. They look like one of the more talented teams in the league the last 3, 4, 5 years. I think Mike Zimmer's a hell of a football coach. I think Rick Spielman's an outstanding general manager. And I really like what he did here, because as much as I like Stephon Diggs, I think he's an excellent receiver, but to get the extra first-round pick in a year when they say there could be as many as 7 first-round receivers, but also knowing that they need help on defense. They got old all of a sudden. Xavier Rhodes is gone. Everson Griffin is gone. They're not uncomfortable with where they're at, Arthur. But everybody assumes that 22 is going to be a wideout, or at least 25. I wouldn't be at all shocked if they looked for a cornerback, maybe a linebacker or an edge rusher in the first round, then came back at wide receiver in the next round. They got a king's ransom for Stephon Diggs. And so I think Minnesota's in really good shape, but I wouldn't assume that just because they traded Diggs that one of those first rounders is going to be a wide receiver.
I agree wholeheartedly. It's easy to forget, Hub. Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs comprise one of the better wide receiver duos in the NFL, certainly top 5 in recent years. Stephon Diggs was a 5th rounder, and Adam Thielen went undrafted. So Rick Spielman's done this a few times, and I would expect him to strike value at receiver regardless of – and in fairness, Laquan Treadwell, another local guy, that one didn't work out so well, but maybe that's the cautionary tale, because I think he went somewhere between 19 and 22. I think it may be as likely, if not more so, that they're looking, like you said, corner, offensive tackle, maybe someone who can, be position flexible on the offensive line, and then maybe circle back at the receiver position, just because they have such a great asset in Thielen, and there's so much depth in this class.
Joe, it's interesting for all the reasons Arthur just said, but we also do have to remember that even before they traded Stephon Diggs, they've been dangerously thin at the position the last 2, 3, 4 years. They drafted Treadwell. They thought he was going to be better actually than Thielen and Diggs. He never could even become the number 3. And so now they definitely need wide receivers. They're going to draft a couple, not just one. But Arthur made a good point I even thought about. They've been tinkering with that offensive line for 3-4 years, and it's still bad. Really deep at offensive tackle in this draft. There's going to be a really good one there. So Joe, I'm going to guess that the Vikings end up going cornerback and offensive tackle at 22 and 25. I don't know what you think about that.
I can see that too, and for the reasons you just mentioned, Hub, it's a deep draft, probably the deepest at offensive line and receiver. So if that's the case, you're going to get guys in the 20s. Maybe another year our top 15 picks, potentially a top 10 pick there. So, I think so too. I think they've got to address both sides of the ball. You got to get some help for Kirk Cousins. He's getting older too, much older than some other guys in the. Well, I mean, Aaron Rodgers is 36 too. So, I guess when I think about it, all the quarterbacks in the NFC North are getting old, except the Bears. Trubisky, right? You got Stafford, Rodgers, Cousins. So you need. They got to protect him. They got to protect Kirk Cousins, but they need some help at receiver, and they need some help in the secondary too.
Yeah, unfortunately, most Bear fans would rather have Rodgers, Stafford, or Cousins, but that's a different story for a different time. I'm tired of people beating up on Mitch, and I think everybody's nuts. I think Mitch Trubisky still has a future with this franchise if he can earn it this year, but that's not where we're at right now. Kyle, the one other thing we do have to add when we come to the Vikings, though, is that unlike or I should say like Detroit, what I just said about the Bears, Rick Spielman's not in any jeopardy. He's done a really good job there, but Mike Zimmer, who's one of my favorite coaches in the NFL, has been rumored to have some heat the last 2 seasons, and they haven't ended well playoff-wise. And so I do think that they're looking for 2 plug-and-play starters in the first round because if they don't get over that hump this year, at least win a couple more playoff games, Mike Zimmer could be in real jeopardy.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's be clear, they have not given Kirk Cousins enough help on the offensive line. And you've seen very, very clear splits between Kirk Cousins with a clean pocket and Kirk Cousins under pressure. So if they get down to that first pick and Andrew Thomas is on the board, like they should be running. I guess they don't have to run up to turn in their pick this year, but that should be a pretty easy pick, I think, there. And then, whatever you get at 25, whether it's wide receiver or defensive back, then you take probably the best available at that position.
Guys, we really appreciate you all being with us today, and I do want to remind you to get to ShawMediaIllinois.com. Sign up for Shaw Media Illinois. It's really easy to do. You're going to get the best Bears coverage anywhere, as well as access to every one of our Shaw Media properties. You support local journalism. You get all your local news, and you are really missing out. So you're probably on the computer right now. As soon as we get done, go to ShawMediaIllinois.com. Come on and sign up. We look forward to having you join us 24/7 throughout the year. Kyle, we've got a lot of folks who already signed up, and I know you got more questions from us.
Yeah, well, let's finish out the NFC North here with the Green Bay Packers, who, once again, like a lot of the teams here, will probably be targeting a wide receiver, or at least looking at it at that pick.
Yeah, the Packers are going to come up at number 30, guys. Just to recap, we talked about Detroit at number 3. You've got Minnesota at 22 and 25. The Packers will be picking 30th, and everybody assumes wide receiver, although they're not that far from Arlington Heights. They need a tight end. I'm sure they know where Cole Kmet is, and it wouldn't be shocking. I made the heretic type comment yesterday that I'm not so sure that Harrison Bryant hasn't moved a notch ahead of Cole Kmet for me, just because right now he is clearly a better blocker and looks like he may be the more complete wide tight end. But I think that tight end is every bit as big a necessity for the Packers as wide receiver is. But Kyle's absolutely right. Wide receiver is a really big need too. They also need help on the interior of that offensive line. They were just passable, really. They're pretty good at center. They're not that good at guard. And then you get back to defense. They've been battling the same problem, it seems like, Joe, 5, 6, 7 years. The middle of that defense, particularly on the back 7, they need help. Blake Martinez has moved on. They've brought in Kirksey, who is injured more than he's healthy. Let's be honest, they overpaid for Adrian Amos. I know Packer fans won't admit that, but I'm pretty sure Brian Gutekunst would at this point. Adrian Amos is fine, but fine isn't good enough, and they've got to get better at safety. They were sky high on Savage last year, who they drafted, and I was too, and he may still turn out to be a great player, but he didn't knock anybody's socks off as a rookie. So I look at that Packer draft board, and I've got tight end, wide receiver, offensive guard on one side, inside linebacker, safety, maybe cornerback as well. Plenty of needs, and they don't get to step up until 30.
Well, and I have to apologize. We were doing the show yesterday, and we were having some audio issues. The first question you asked me, I think, was about our neighbors up north, and I went right to the Bears. I didn't hear Packers, or so. Anyway, we figured we'll get to the Packers today. That's what we're doing now. I think they have 10 picks, if I'm not mistaken. Correct, guys?
They got a boatload of picks, yeah, but they don't get to start early. That's the thing.
Right, but I could see them trading up, trading down. They have a lot of scenarios too. Again, in a deep draft, so maybe they can move up, collect more picks. But yeah, everything you said there about their needs, everyone would assume it's a wide receiver to get Aaron Rodgers some more help. But I wonder at some point too if they would draft a quarterback. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is 36. I know he's still competing at a high level, at a Pro Bowl level, but with that many picks, I'm not saying they would try to move up into the second round, and take one of the quarterbacks who might be there. But I wonder if some point they would take a quarterback. But certainly they need help at receiver, tight end. You got to replace Jimmy Graham. How do you replace Jimmy Graham? You got to draft the guy. So lots of things they can do, and they're in a good position too with so many draft picks.
Arthur, I think Brian Gutekunst has gotten off to a good start. You look at this Green Bay organization, and one of the reasons they've been so successful has been their consistency. Ron Wolf, for me, should be a Hall of Famer. There was a brief interim there where Mike Sherman ran things, but then, Ted Thompson took over for a decade. Thompson, a Wolf, brought in from Seattle, but at one time a Wolf protege. Gutekunst, a Thompson protege. He's been bold in his first couple drafts, made a big trade to get an extra first-round pick last year. So, it'll be interesting to see what they do. But I think because of what Joe just said about Rodgers being 36 years old, yeah, they got to think about quarterback down the road. But right now, they've got to get him some help. And so, to me, at 30, it kind of comes back to tight end, wide receiver, tight end. I don't know in which order.
Yeah, I think so. I think receiver is a significantly greater need for them than tight end, only because remember they drafted Jay Sternberger in round 3 last year. He more or less redshirted after some early injuries, but they like him, obviously, and I liked him too coming out of Texas A&M. I think wide receiver is probably what everyone's expected for a while here, and getting that compliment for Devontae Adams. I think if any of the 2 top linebackers, Kenneth Murray or Patrick Queen, somehow are available at 30, that would be a great pick. They made a value signing in Christian Kirksey, but obviously they were in the Nick Kwiatkowski market and lost Blake Martinez. And then I think just because of the depth of this draft, and we look at them as a team that's trying to plan ahead after losing another local kid in Brian Balaga, I wouldn't be stunned to see them look at offensive tackle. They made another value signing with Rick Wagner. And just back to tight end real quick, another local kid, Robert Tonyan, we know they continue to like, and he'll have an opportunity to produce more with Jimmy Graham out of the picture. So I don't know if they're necessarily desperate at tight end, but we know they need receiver help. We know they want linebackers too.
Kyle, it is fun, though, that both the Bears and the Packers, and for my money, it's just the best rivalry in all of sports when you put all of that goes into it, both the history and the heritage, and the legacies of these teams. Many Bears and Packers fans will argue that both teams' greatest need is at tight end. And there's really only the 2 guys that you're going to look at in the first couple rounds. I mean, there's other players. There's Jared Pinkney from Vanderbilt. There's the other Bryant, Hunter Bryant from Washington, I believe. Arthur mentioned Albert O from Missouri. There's some good football players. But if you don't get that tight end by the middle of the second round, then there's a chance you're not going to get them until the 4th or 5th round anyway, because the rest of these prospects aren't really ranked that high.
Yeah, unless you're willing to take a chance. And I've seen Thaddeus Moss out of LSU kind of coming up some draft boards here lately. Obviously, he's got some good bloodlines, being the son of Randy Moss. Maybe a team takes a chance on him in the 3rd round. What do you guys think of that?
Well, I've looked at Thaddeus Moss quite a bit because anybody who watched the national championship game, had to know who he was with his 2 touchdowns and them, flipping to Randy in the crowd throughout the game. And he's gonna get drafted. He's gonna play in the NFL. But when you look at his career at LSU, he's a little undersized. He doesn't have his dad's speed or athleticism, and he had the best game of his career in that national championship game. So. God knows having Randy Moss's son catching passes sounds like a good thing. By the way, he also, and Randy Moss doesn't get enough credit because I think it was his 4th or 5th year in the league. I called him a sociopath when he got caught picking a fight with a cop or something like that. There was all kinds of things that went on early in his career. He has turned out to be one of the most solid citizens the NFL has ever produced. He is a class act. He's an outstanding dad and family man, and he raised this young man right. And so I think he'd be a good addition to a roster, but I'm not so sure that at best case he isn't a number 2 or a number 3 tight end.
Can I just interject real quick on Moss? I mentioned yesterday Stephen Sullivan, his teammate at LSU in the same position room, is another guy. I just had mentioned that a lot of times these LSU skill guys are better in the NFL than they are in college. That might be the case with Moss as well. But remember, I think he had there's a Liz Frank injury. I don't remember if it required surgery. It came out at the combine. So I wonder how that's going to affect him just with teams' inability to get their hands on these prospects and get their own medical testing done. So we'll have to wait and see what effect, if any, that ends up having on Thaddeus Moss this weekend.
All right, guys, for those of you who joined us yesterday, we're using a little different technology today. We had a little bit of a audio problem. We're on Zoom, and we get time limits on these Zoom meetings, so we've only got about 10 minutes or so to go, maybe 12 best case. So, Kyle, let's see if we can rip through some more questions.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get a few of these Bears questions. We talked a lot yesterday about the Bears, but we do have a few more here. David asked, the defense was not as good after Akeem Hicks went down. Should we be targeting the defensive lineman in the draft?
Well, you're right about the defense struggling without Akeem Hicks, but that's because Akeem Hicks is one of the top 3 or 4 interior defensive linemen in the NFL. I think that actually the Bears are extremely deep on the defensive line because Eddie Goldman is a really good football player. He's been a Pro Bowl alternate the last 2 years, one of the better nose tackles in the league. Roy Robertson Harris, as a complimentary guy, can be a difference maker. And I was sky high on Bilal Nichols at the end of his rookie year. He wasn't bad last year, but he was hampered by that knee all year long. So, you're playing a 30 front, you're 4 deep already. When they go into their sub packages, you can move Khalil Mack and Robert Quinn both up on the ends and move all those other guys inside. Brent Urban turned out to be a really nice value signing last year, who they've also brought back. So, Joe, you never have enough good football players at any position, but I would actually look at that as one of the lesser areas of need for the Bears going into this draft. To me, that happens if Ryan Pace sees a guy on the board wherever he's picking that he had rated a round or 2 lower. But other than that, I don't think that's going to be a priority.
Yeah, and get it. If you had 10 picks, maybe at some point, but certainly not early on. I mean, you just can't do it. I think they have, if they stay healthy, they have enough depth there on their front 7. So, yeah, you'd like to draft a guy at every position. If you can find Akeem Hicks, by all means, in the 2nd round, take him. But that's probably not going to happen. So, I just think ideally, yeah, you'd want to take depth, whether it be up front or at linebacker. But I just don't think they can afford to do that. They got too many other needs.
Arthur?
Yeah, Hub, you hit the nail on the head. Although I would say I don't think the Bears went into last year thinking Riley Ridley in round 4 from a need vantage point was anything they'd be considering. But that's what you just said. If a really good player is really sliding, then maybe it makes sense. It would be the 2nd consecutive offseason the Bears didn't make a major move at the position, which are always a little leery over, but they do look to be pretty well situated with the current depth chart there.
Yeah, Kyle, Arthur just had the perfect example of how it could happen. Every mock I saw last year, every team I talked to had Riley Ridley somewhere between the middle of the 2nd to the middle of the 3rd round, and he was still sitting there on day 3. The Bears had to pull the trigger. And by the way, look how that worked out. They're now counting on him hopefully to be their number 3 because things change from year to year. But right now, it just doesn't seem like it would be a priority.
Yeah, I mean, Akeem Hicks, obviously a tremendous player. And you always want more depth on your team, but the Bears aren't in a position to do that. And no team is able to withstand the loss of an Akeem Hicks. It's going to make a difference on your defense. You just, you're going to roll those dice and hope you can stay healthy this year. But all right, so let's go ahead and move on. And we have a question from Peter. I'm hoping I'm getting this right because it was phrased a little oddly. But would you rather have picks 43 and 50, which the Bears have, or would you rather have 43, 87, 98, and 100? And what I believe he's referencing is the fact that the Patriots have 3 third round picks. So I'm guessing he thinks that the Bears should be trading 50, try and get into the third round with the Patriots picks.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a real simple answer. I'd rather have 43, 87, 93, and 100. I mean, you can get 4 good football players instead of 2, you know, and once you get out of the first round, once you get past anywhere 26 to 35, these prospects, these grades start getting a lot closer anyway. And you know, Arthur, that's what I talked about yesterday. I think that ideally, I'd probably rather have 50, 87, 93, and 100 because you're going to get more for the 43rd pick than you get for the 50th pick. It's not a lot, but it actually could be an extra 4th round pick. And I do think the one thing I do not want the Bears doing is trading up because, you know, it was worth it. I would make the Khalil Mack trade 100 times over, and I will never have any second thoughts about it. It was worth the draft penalty they've paid in 2018 and 2019, but I'm sorry, 2019, 2020, but you do want to get back to normal next year. You know, you want to have 1 or 2 or 3, because then you can really maneuver and start to add picks. It's not even the lack of picks that is hurting the Bears so much right now, is the lack of maneuverability. And so the one ability they do have is to add some decent picks by going down a little bit, but don't penalize yourself again in years going forward.
Yeah, got to do it this year. Got to trade back, get some extra picks. Guys, coincidence or not, the 4th round has easily been Ryan Pace's best in the draft. Nick Kwiatkowski, Eddie Jackson, Tariq Cohen. He's found studs there. Right now, they don't have a 4th rounder. Jacksonville has it for the Nick Foles trade. So in addition to trying to recoup that 3rd rounder, same deal with the 4th. And, yeah, the more picks, the better, the more shots you have to take.
Yeah, Joe, Arthur's absolutely right. But let's not forget Jordan Howard and Bilal Nichols in the 5th round. And so – you know, you get good football players at the end of day 2, at the beginning of day 3. And so, Pete, I'd load the picks up. Joe, I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking how many times, I don't want to call it lucky because there's skill in what these guys do, and I don't want to discredit any scout, but if you keep on banking on getting guys in the 4th and 5th round to be impact players on your team, that's tough, man. I mean, I give them all the credit in the world, but you got to hit on those 1st round picks, those 2nd round picks. So, and I keep going back to that 2nd round. I mean, I think you're going to be able to find your starting safety there at 43 or 50. And I don't want them to keep depleting future drafts here. So like you guys said, I mean, it'd be nice in 2021 to have a 1st round pick, a 2nd round pick, a 3rd round pick. We've done too much trading up. And when you look back, like even the picks like with David Montgomery and Anthony Miller, trading up to get those guys, that's another question for you guys, Hub and Arthur. Was it worth it? Based on it's still early in their careers for both of those guys, but you know, how much are you gaining? And I'll tell you one more, getting back to how this COVID shutdown has affected everything here, is sometimes, you know, we all are probably guilty of this in our jobs. We overthink things. So I can't, you know, scouts in the NFL draft or any draft, there's probably so much overthinking. At some point, you just got to back off and say, this is my gut. This is what I know. This is what I see on film, and go for it and quit trying to overthink it because, hey, I'll speak for myself. I've gotten in trouble doing that before.
Hey, Kyle, I have to thank Joe for mentioning that starting safety because I talked about Jordan Howard and Bilal Nichols. Adrian Amos, also a 5th round pick, who started his first game as a rookie, every game for 4 years. And then you got a 4th round pick when you moved on, because these guys who are not Pro Bowlers are still valuable parts. Adrian Amos was a key of that, quote, generational defense in 2018. So, yeah, you cannot belittle, you know, the day 2, the high day 3 picks.
Yeah, and, you know, I personally, I don't think the Bears are going to trade down. That's certainly not going to trade up. But Hub, you seem more confident than most people I've heard from in terms of the safety of Ryan Pace. But I do think they feel like their window is open, and I think there has to be at least some sort of pressure on them to win now. And I think that there's going to be high-impact players available at 43 and 50. So I think they're probably going to use those picks unless they are overwhelmed. So let's, with that thought on my end, the final question we have, and we can wrap it up here, is let's say the Bears are picking at 43 and 50, right? What 2 picks do you see there, or would you say the Bears knock that out of the park? They got 2 players that can help them this year.
All right, let me just quickly comment on the other thing you said about the pressure on Ryan Pace. everybody in the NFL is under pressure to win now. That's why they call it not for long. I mean, you can come up with all the acronyms you want. What I'm saying about Ryan Pace is another year like last year isn't going to get him fired. He's not going to get fired for winning 7, 8, 9 games as long as there's a perception that the team is moving in the right direction and there are reasons for it. The angry Bear fan crowd out there is really a small minority of Bears Nation who bought the hype, bought the buildup. So did I. So did most of us. We thought that they had a chance to win playoff games last year. But when they're realistic, they also look at the injuries they had last year that they didn't have the year before. They looked at the step back that Trubisky took that nobody expected. And so those aren't things that get a general manager fired. All I'm saying is that unless the wheels come off, unless they only win 3, 4, 5 games, I know George McCaskey better than most, and he is not overreactive. He's not a guy who's going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. I know they're very happy with the job that Ryan Pace is doing right now. He has to continue to do well to keep that job. I'm not saying he's definitely back in 2021. I just don't think the pressure is quite as great as some people are suggesting. So let's come back to 43 or 50. And I know, it's fun to start to plug in names. I did a brief intro to our top 100, and I made the point, I'll say it here for anyone watching, I can't stand mock drafts. They always drive me nuts because it's the only test in the world I know where the best at it get 10 to 14 of the 32 answers right, and somehow that's a good grade. But I understand it's provocative and it's entertaining, and that's why we do it. I'm looking at that 43rd pick, and I'm kind of where Joe was. I think that they need a perfectly complementary starting safety. They needed to do 2 things to get the defense back to where it was in 2018. They needed to get the pass rush back. Well, they've addressed that with Robert Quinn. And if Akeem Hicks is healthy, that makes a huge difference. The other thing they needed was somebody who was going to complement Eddie Jackson's style of play. They talk about safeties being interchangeable in today's NFL. I think they need a strong safety to go with Eddie Jackson, who's a free safety. And Xavier McKinney is the #1 safety prospect on the board. He is also an Alabama kid, and that would be fun. He's not a true strong safety, and he's not going to last till 43. But I think the next 3 best safeties, Grant Delpit and Jeremy Chin and Kyle Duggar. Now, some people have Antoine Winfield Jr. in there, and he probably could play strong safety, even though he's only 5'9". But his injury history scares me. His bloodlines I love. His dad was a great cornerback. But I don't think he is the complement to Jackson that these other 3 are. And so Delpit is my first choice. I talked about this yesterday. And if they took him at 43, I would be thrilled. Denzel Mims is a wide receiver who I think is the perfect complement to what they're looking for there. Could be there at 43, probably should be there at 43, might be there at 50. If they came away with either Delpit or Jeremy Chin and then Denzel Mims, I'd be really happy with how they use those 2 second-round picks. Joe, we'll let you go next.
Yeah, I like both of those picks, Hub. And again, I think if you take a safety there, a guy who can play the strong safety position, you basically improved 2 positions because Eddie Jackson, I know he went to the Pro Bowl again, but he wasn't the same guy. He clearly was not as good last season as he was in 18 when he was an all-pro and all everything. So I think you could potentially improve 2 positions if you pick the right guy there at safety. And then wide receiver, we've talked about it a lot yesterday, about getting a speed guy. Mims, 4.38, I think is 40. Good size too, 6'3". So, I mean, that's another guy who could be a great fill-in. And then I know we're talking about 2020, but we need to see more of Riley Ridley and that 2019 class. So if that 2019 class steps it up a little more, including Montgomery and those other guys, the cornerbacks they drafted late, and then you supplement with 43 and 50, 2 good football players. Again, you got to stay healthy like every NFL team, but I think they're in a good position there. But I think you got to come away with the safety, unless the corner that you absolutely cannot live without is there at 43 or 50.
Arthur, what do you think?
I prefer corner, guys. I said yesterday, I just think the positional value, I think the options the Bears have right now, I think Deion Bush might be fine opposite Eddie Jackson. And I really like Kevin Tolliver, but that's a much bigger projection. So if someone like a Jalen Johnson from Utah, Jeff Gladney from TCU is somehow there at 43, I think those guys would fit really well with Chuck Pagano. And this is just assuming that someone like Josh Jones or Ezra Cleveland, if a left tackle falls out of the first round and is somehow available in the 40s even, I think it would make great sense for the Bears to make that move. But then at number 50, you look at those wide receivers. I said Michael Pittman yesterday. I love him. But KJ Hamler, another one, if they really want true speed from Penn State, the little dude. I know that Bill Lazor knows him well, and so does Allen Robinson, another Detroit native. So a couple receivers to keep an eye on there in the 50 range as well. But those are the 2 or 3 positions I look at.
All right, Kyle, we're going to put you on the spot too, and then I got one more quick fun question before we put a bow on this puppy.
All right. Well, at 43, I think it's probably an offensive lineman like Ezra Cleveland. I think they could go with Ruiz if they want an interior lineman, if he's still there, out of Michigan. If T. Higgins fell to 43, I think that would be a slam dunk pick. I don't think he's going to make it there, but I have seen him sliding in some mocks at least. But I think it'll probably be offensive line at 43 and then come back at 50 with the wide receiver. I think Mims would be great. Rager would be another good pick. Either of those guys, I think, would fill a definite need.
Yeah, I'll tell you guys, Carlos Ruiz has a lot of Olin Kreutz in him, and I would love it. But every time I hype a Michigan guy, everybody assumes it's just my bias. So I try not to go there. All right, I said a fun question. Let's throw everything out and say what would be a fun favorite pick for you at 43. And when I say throw everything out, forget the needs, forget what they should do, but a player who you have fallen in love with, who you think if he was there at 43, they have to take. And I know I'm just springing this on you. So Arthur, I think maybe a little closer to it than Joe on a 24/7 basis. I'll let you go first and let Joe and Kyle think about it for a minute. Who'd be the most fun at 43? What would you say? Hey, I don't know if he's going to be any good, but I love the pick.
It's too obvious, and I'm sorry for taking the low-hanging fruit, but you did ask me to go first. It's got to be Jalen Hurts for me. I mean, talk about the football character
my guy.
of this kid. Talk about the ability to potentially plug him in as a rookie, as like a red zone weapon. You got special packages for him. I think he can be a starter in the future in the NFL. It can be a really unique one. So that, for me, he may not help you on day one, but he may solve the problem for the next 10 years down the road.
All right, Joe, you're up.
That's my guy. I said it yesterday, Jalen Hurts. It's not going to happen. But, man, that would be fun. I mean, can you imagine sports talk radio from now until camp or during camp with Jalen Hurts around here? Wouldn't happen, but, man, it would be fun. And, you know, maybe he's the guy. Maybe he's your future. But that would be a lot of fun, boys.
Kyle, who's your guy?
Well, yeah, Hurts. That would definitely make things entertaining around Chicago this coming year. But yeah, I don't see that happening. I alluded to it talking before. I think it's T. Higgins. If he was to fall down to 43, I fell in love with him this past year. I think he's everything that the Bears could use. And in most drafts, if the wide receiver class wasn't this deep, I think he's the guy the team would be reaching for in the teens, and he's the guy that should be there into the 30s.
All righty, guys. Arthur and Joe ruined this for me. I asked the question because I thought and I was going to come with Jalen Hurts. And the reason is, some of our listeners may know I do a national radio for Westwood One, the broadcast of, Sunday, Monday, Thursday night games. And one of my partners last year was Kurt Warner, who I've gotten friendlier with. We're not best buddies, but we do games together. We talk a lot. And Kurt is absolutely – he's a Hall of Fame quarterback. So when I say he's a quarterback guru, there's no question about it. I've been in love with Jalen Hurts since he was at Alabama. And while he's not an NFL passer right now, he is more developed than Lamar Jackson. And we saw what Lamar Jackson is doing at quarterback in the NFL. What troubled me about it was I didn't see him as a fit for Matt Nagy's offense. And now I'm hearing Kurt come out and say that he thinks the best fit for Jalen Hurts is the Bears, and that sealed it for me. So I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's going to be there at 50 as well as 43. But it would make this one of my favorite drafts of all time if it did. So we shall see. Guys, before we say goodbye, we want to once again thank the Collins Construction Group. They aim to create the home of your dreams with remodels and renovations. Go to ccghome.com for more information. Also, get to shawmediaillinois.com. Sign up. You get access to not only the best Bears coverage in the area, but you get access to all of our local properties. You get local news. You support local journalism. And I know I'm a regular Daily Herald guy every day. You all should be. Our thanks. I couldn't read Joe and Barry if I didn't have the Daily Herald. So we really appreciate everybody being with us for these. We hope you've enjoyed it. As a matter of fact, send us your feedback, because if you liked it enough, maybe we'll do it again Monday or Tuesday and do our post-draft show. Let us know if it's something you're interested in. In the meantime, everybody enjoy the draft. You know, guys, we need some fun in our lives. We're looking for it in different ways. I want to leave the same way we left yesterday. We know it's tough out there. We appreciate the NFL for doing this, but more importantly, there are bigger things in life. Please follow the science, stay safe, keep your distance, wear your mask. Let's get everybody healthy. Let's get back together in person as soon as we can. Thanks so much for joining us today.